Some moments in life don't come with warning. You don't know they're about to change you. One second, you're just a tired father carrying a lunch bag his son forgot, and the next second, you're standing frozen in a doorway, your hand still on the handle, because what you just heard has cracked something open in your chest that you didn't even know was closed. That's exactly what happened to a man named Daniel Reyes on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, in a school cafeteria that smelled like pizza and floor wax, in a small town most people have never heard of. He walked in expecting nothing. He walked out a different man. Before we get into this story, if you believe that small acts of kindness can change the world one heart at a time, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button, tap the like icon, and drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. This channel is called Kindness Waves, and every single day we bring you true-to-life stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things with nothing but love, patience, and a good heart. If that sounds like something you need more of in your life, you're exactly where you belong. Now, let's get into today's story. Daniel Reyes was 34 years old, and for the last 2 years, he had been doing something he never trained for and never expected to do alone: raising his son. His wife, Maria, had passed away after a short battle with illness. And in the blink of an eye, Daniel went from being a husband and father to being the only parent his 8-year-old son, Ethan, had left in the world. Daniel worked as a delivery driver for a regional shipping company. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills mostly. Money was tight. It had been tight since Maria's medical bills piled up, and it hadn't gotten easier since. Daniel didn't talk about it much, not even to his own mother, because pride is a strange thing. It makes you smile at church potlucks and nod when someone asks, "How are you holding up?" even when the honest answer is barely. Ethan was a quiet boy. He had his mother's soft brown eyes and a habit of chewing on his shirt sleeve when he was nervous. Teachers described him as sweet, a little shy, the kind of kid who'd rather sit in the back of the classroom than raise his hand. Since his mother passed, he'd grown even quieter. He didn't cry much anymore, at least not in front of Daniel. But sometimes Daniel would hear him through the thin bedroom wall at night, whispering things to a photograph of his mom, soft enough that Daniel couldn't make out the words, but loud enough that his own eyes would burn with tears he tried to blink away. On this particular Tuesday, Daniel had a delivery route that happened to pass close to Ethan's elementary school around lunchtime. That morning, in the rush of getting out the door, Ethan had left his lunch bag on the kitchen counter. Daniel noticed it the second he grabbed his truck keys, and for a moment he thought about just letting it go. Ethan could buy a school lunch. It wasn't the end of the world. But something in Daniel wouldn't let it rest. Maybe it was guilt for all the times he couldn't make it to school events. Maybe it was simply love. Either way, he grabbed the bag, checked his delivery schedule, and figured he could swing by during his lunch break and drop it off at the front office. He pulled into the school parking lot around noon, the same time as the lunch period, which he didn't realize until he stepped out of his truck and heard the muffled sound of 100 children's voices spilling out from somewhere inside the building. He walked through the front doors, badge clipped to his shirt from checking in at the office, lunch bag in hand, planning to just hand it to the secretary and be on his way. But the front office secretary, a warm older woman named Mrs. Castillo, told him Ethan's class was already seated in the cafeteria, and if he hurried, he could catch them before lunch ended. "Just go on down that hallway and turn left, hon," she said, waving him along. "The cafeteria doors are right there. You can hand it to him yourself." Daniel smiled and thanked her, grateful for the small chance to see his son's face light up in the middle of an otherwise gray day. He walked down the hallway, following the noise, past bulletin boards covered in crayon drawings of families and pets and rainbows, past a bright yellow sign that said, "Kindness is contagious." Catch it, he didn't think much of the sign at the time. He would think about it a lot later. As he got closer to the double doors of the cafeteria, the noise grew louder, that familiar roar of 100 kids talking over each other, chairs scraping, trays clattering. He reached for the door handle, ready to push it open, when he heard something that made every muscle in his body go still. It was a child's voice, not Ethan's, a different boy, one Daniel didn't recognize, and the boy was crying, not screaming, not throwing a tantrum, but that soft, humiliated kind of crying that comes from a place of deep embarrassment. And through the small window in the cafeteria door, Daniel could see him. A small boy, thin, wearing a shirt that looked a size too big, standing near the lunch line with an empty tray in his hands. His face was red. His eyes were down. Kids around him had gone quiet, that awkward quiet that happens right after something painful has been said out loud. Daniel's hand stayed on the door handle, but he didn't push it open yet. Something told him to wait, to watch, to listen. The lunch lady behind the counter, a heavy-set woman with kind eyes and flour-dusted apron, was gently trying to explain something to the boy, her voice low enough that Daniel couldn't make out every word, but the tone was unmistakably apologetic and sad. From what Daniel could piece together, the boy's lunch account was empty. Not a little short, completely empty. And the school's rule, like so many schools across the country, was that when a lunch account ran dry, a child could still get a meal. For this little boy, that meant no chicken tenders, no fresh fruit, no dessert. Just a plain sandwich. And even that came with a quiet, humiliating announcement in front of his classmates. Some of the older kids nearby had noticed. One of them, not out of cruelty exactly, but out of that careless bluntness children sometimes have, had said loud enough for half the cafeteria to hear, "Ha! He's broke. He can't even pay for lunch." Laughter rippled through a nearby table, quick and thoughtless. The kind of laughter that vanishes as fast as it appears, but leaves a wound behind that doesn't vanish nearly as quickly. That's when the little boy started crying, standing there in front of everyone, holding an empty tray, ashamed of something that was never his fault to begin with. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He knew this feeling too well now. Ever since Maria passed, ever since the bills started stacking, he knew what it felt like to be the reason your family didn't have enough, even when you were trying your absolute hardest. He knew what shame tasted like when you didn't do anything wrong except simply not have enough money. And here was a child, maybe 7 or 8 years old, learning that same bitter lesson far too early in life. He was about to push open the door, some fatherly instinct in him ready to comfort this stranger's child, when something else happened. Something that stopped him cold. A chair scraped back from a nearby table. Daniel watched through the window as his own son, Ethan, stood up. Ethan, the shy boy who hated raising his hand in class, who barely spoke above a whisper most days, who Daniel sometimes worried had grown too small inside himself since losing his mother, walked straight over to the crying boy. He didn't hesitate. He didn't look around to see who was watching. He walked right up, put a hand on the boy's shoulder, and said something Daniel couldn't hear through the glass. Then Ethan turned to the lunch lady and said something else. And even though Daniel couldn't make out the exact words yet, he could see the lunch lady's face soften, could see her nod slowly, could see something shift in the air of that cafeteria. Unable to stay outside any longer, Daniel finally pushed the door open, quietly, staying near the back so he wouldn't draw attention. He wanted to hear this. He needed to hear this. Ethan was speaking now, loud enough for Daniel to catch it from where he stood. "You can have some of mine," Ethan said to the crying boy, whose name, Daniel would later learn, was Malik. "My dad packed extra today. Look, I've got a whole sandwich, chips, and my mom's oatmeal cookies. Well, my dad makes them now, but they're still good, I promise." Malik wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, still sniffling, clearly unsure if he should accept. "You don't have to," he mumbled. "I know I don't have to," Ethan said, and Daniel would replay this next part, but that wasn't the end of it. As Malik sat down, still holding his mostly empty tray, one of the girls at the table, a small girl with pigtails named Sophia, pulled a granola bar out of her own lunch bag and slid it across the table toward him. "Here," she said simply. "I wasn't going to finish this anyway." Another boy at the table, chubby-cheeked kid named Tommy, dug into his lunchbox and pulled out a juice box, sliding it over too. "You can have this. I already had milk." Within about 90 seconds, without a single adult prompting them, without any teacher stepping in to organize it, for kids at that table had quietly rearranged their own lunches so that Malik, a boy who had been standing there crying moments earlier, now had a full tray of food in front of him, shared piece by piece from children who had almost nothing to spare themselves. Because most of these families, Daniel would later learn, weren't wealthy either. This was a working-class school in a working-class neighborhood. These children weren't giving away extra from abundance. They were giving away a little bit of what little they had. Daniel stood frozen near the back of that cafeteria, lunch bag still in his hand, and felt tears come to his eyes before he could stop them. He wasn't an emotional man, or at least he didn't used to be, not before Maria passed. But grief has a way of cracking a person open, of making them raw in places they used to be tough, and in that moment, watching his son show more compassion and courage than Daniel sometimes felt he had left in himself, something inside him broke and healed all at once. He thought about all the nights he'd lain awake, wondering if he was failing Ethan, wondering if working so much, being gone so often, missing so many school events had somehow damaged his son, made him grow up too fast, made him lose some piece of childhood he could never get back. He thought about the guilt he carried every single day, the quiet fear that he wasn't enough, that no matter how hard he worked, he couldn't replace what Ethan had lost. But watching his son in that moment, Daniel understood something new. Somewhere in all that struggle, in all those hard nights and harder mornings, he and Maria had managed to raise a boy with a heart big enough to notice someone else's pain and brave enough to do something about it, even at 8 years old, even in a room full of watching eyes. He didn't walk over right away. He let the moment breathe. He watched Ethan and his friends laugh together, watched Malik slowly relax, his shoulders coming down for around his ears, watch him take a bite of Ethan's sandwich and actually smile, a real smile, small but real. Eventually, Daniel made his way over, and Ethan looked up surprised. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Daniel held up the forgotten lunch bag with a small laugh. "You left this on the counter, bud. I figured you might need it. Looks like you had backup plans, though." Ethan grinned sheepishly. "Yeah, I gave some of it away. Is that okay?" Daniel knelt down beside the table, right there in front of Ethan's friends, and put a hand on his son's shoulder. "Ethan, that is more than okay. That might be the best thing I've seen anyone do in a long time." He glanced at Malik, who was watching this exchange quietly, still a little shy, still a little unsure of his place at this table. Daniel gave him a warm smile. "Hey buddy, you doing okay?" Malik nodded, a little embarrassed but clearly comforted. "Yes, sir. Thank you." "No need to thank me," Daniel said gently. "Thank this guy right here." He nodded toward Ethan. "He's the one who saw you needed help and didn't wait around for someone else to do something about it." Word of what happened in that cafeteria didn't stay contained to one lunch table. By the end of the school day, teachers were talking about it in the staff lounge. By that evening, a few parents who'd heard about it from their kids were posting about it in the school's community group online, not with any names attached, just a simple message about how proud they were of the kindness they were seeing in their children's school. Within a week, the story had reached the school principal, Mrs. Alvarez, who decided that instead of letting this beautiful moment quietly fade away, she wanted to build something from it. She started what she called the Lunch Buddy Fund, a simple system where families who were able to contribute even $1 or $2 could add money to a shared account, ensuring that no child in that school would ever again have to stand in a lunch line with an empty tray and an aching heart. Teachers began keeping small snack baskets in their classrooms for any student who needed a little extra without ever having to ask or explain why. The yellow sign in the hallway that said, "Kindness is contagious. Catch it," suddenly meant something different to everyone who walked past it, because now they had proof of exactly how true it was. As for Daniel, that day changed something in him too. He'd been carrying so much weight alone, so much fear that he was failing as a single father, so much grief dressed up as exhaustion. But watching his son stand up for a stranger, watching a table full of 8-year-olds share what little they had without being asked, without needing credit, without a single adult telling them to, reminded Daniel of something he desperately needed to remember. Kindness doesn't require wealth. It doesn't require perfect circumstances or extra resources or a life free of struggle. Sometimes the people with the least to spare are the ones who give the most freely because they understand, in a way that people with abundance sometimes forget, exactly what it feels like to need help. Daniel started volunteering at the school once a month after that, helping serve lunch on Fridays. Not because he had extra time, he didn't, but because he wanted to be near that feeling again, that quiet, powerful reminder that goodness still exists in this world, often in the smallest and most unexpected places, like a cafeteria table where a granola bar and a sandwich meant more than money ever could. Ethan and Malik became close friends after that day. They started walking to the bus together, sitting next to each other in class when they could, and Malik started coming over some weekends to play video games or ride bikes around the neighborhood. Daniel noticed his son seemed a little lighter after that, a little more like the boy he used to be before grief settled into their house. And maybe that's the quiet magic of kindness, that it doesn't just help the person receiving it. It heals the person giving it too. If you think about it, that entire moment in the cafeteria happened because of a forgotten lunch bag. If Ethan hadn't left it on the counter, Daniel never would have walked into that cafeteria at that exact moment. He never would have witnessed his son's quiet courage. He never would have been reminded, on one of his hardest days, that everything he was pouring into raising his son alone was somehow, in some way, working. We walk through this world every single day, surrounded by opportunities to be kind, small moments that seem insignificant in the instant they happen, but that ripple outward in ways we may never fully see. A granola bar shared at a lunch table. A hand placed gently on a stranger's shoulder. A sentence spoken without hesitation. You can have some of mine. None of the children at that table changed the world that day, not in the way we usually measure such things. There was no headline, no award, no recognition beyond a school hallway conversation and a community post online. But for one little boy named Malik, who walked into that cafeteria feeling like he had nothing and walked out feeling like he belonged, it was the entire world. And for one exhausted, grieving father named Daniel, who walked in carrying a forgotten lunch bag and walked out carrying something far heavier and far more beautiful, the quiet, unshakable knowledge that his son was going to be all right, that despite everything they had lost, something good and whole and kind had survived and was growing inside him. So if there's anything to take from this story, let it be this. You never know which small act of kindness might become someone else's turning point. You never know whose empty tray you might be able to fill, whose quiet shame you might be able to lift, whose heart might be healed by nothing more than a shared sandwich and a genuine smile. Kindness doesn't ask if you have enough. It simply asks if you're willing to give what you have. If this story touched your heart today, share it with someone who needs a little reminder that goodness still exists in this world. Like this video, subscribe to Kindness Waves for more true stories that remind us what really matters, and leave a comment telling us about a small act of kindness you witnessed or received that you'll never forget. Until next time, go out there and be someone's reason to believe in kindness again.